Welcome back. We've been discussing the food crisis in Haiti. Now joining us to talk about that crisis and the issue of globalization is Jagdish Bhagwati, formerly the United Nations Advisor on Globalization and currently a professor of economics at Columbia University in New York. Welcome to the show, sir.
Yes.
We have been talking about the Haitian food crisis, but I was wondering, you've written a great deal about globalization. You're a strong defender of globalization. Didn't the problem in Haiti really start in the 1980s when the Haitians decided that they were going to drop tariff barriers, that they were going to open their markets to United States rice, so-called Miami rice, and there was a flood of rice into Haiti. There were large imports, and it effectively put Haitian farmers out of business.
That can happen, but I think generally speaking it doesn't really happen with large numbers of countries actually. The agricultural imports do in fact lead to efficiency just like any other imports. Imports will in fact undermine the specific activities in which you are specializing because of tariffs. When imports come in, you should be moving out to other activities. If you look at the experience around the world, there's absolutely little evidence that agriculture has been undermined as a result of imports. There are 40 out of 49 countries in Africa which are the least developed countries, and they are actually importers of food. But the reason why some of them were exporters and became importers was not because suddenly subsidies increased or tariffs were declined, because many of the tariffs are still in place in large parts of the underdeveloped countries. Agriculture is the last sector which has been really liberalized in a big way, and we are still awaiting the next revolution of tariff changes and subsidy changes. So what has been happening is due to internal troubles in many cases, inefficiencies in the system, agricultural revolution being snuffed out like in countries like India because of the Green Revolution having petered out, and the new seeds are creating problems because they're considered to be Frankenstein foods and so on. So I think there are a whole lot of complicated reasons why agriculture hasn't done as well as it has, but increased imports are the least part. Maybe anything is possible in economics, and Haiti might be a case where agriculture imports have created problems, and people have not been able to find alternative occupations. But I would say, as a general proposition, the Haitian situation cannot be generalized.
When we look at the issue of globalization, is globalization simply the removal of tariff barriers?
Oh no, globalization is really integration of the national economies into the world economy. That's the most common definition of economic globalization. So it means trade, equity investment, or what people generally call multinational investment, short-term capital flows, which are particularly dangerous, as you know, international migration, which is a big issue now, and finally patents, diffusion of technology and how much you pay for it, and what should be the extent of the patent rights. So when you take trade, which is what you're asking me about, if you liberalize trade, of course it will lead to more trade. But even if you had constant barriers, as incomes expand, people import more at any given restriction. Like if you've got road traffic, it can increase either because you've got better roads or because you've got more vehicles.
Well, let's talk about the issue of subsidies. American farmers are subsidized.
Yes.
Doesn't that hurt farmers in places, in continents like Africa?
No, not in Africa. That's the interesting thing. What it does is to reduce prices, because if I subsidize output anywhere, it leads to more production. More production would lead to lower prices. So people who are exporters, like what I call the Keynes Group countries, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Thailand, Philippines, etc., they are the ones who are bargaining for, and quite correctly, for these subsidies to be removed, because they say, look, our prices of our exports are falling. That was a situation in cotton for 4 African countries, which are net exporters. But as I said, if you take 40 out of 49 of the least developed countries, the poorest countries in the world, about whom we worry naturally more than about other developing countries, they're net importers. As we're discovering now that food prices are rising, those who are importing food and other commodities, agricultural commodities, are actually being hurt. And so finally the point which I've been making in the literature for God knows how long is that we need to liberalize agriculture, but then and remove subsidies, and that will help the Keynes Group countries, but it will harm these other countries. So instead of pretending that such removal of subsidies is going to help everybody, we have to recognize that it's going to hurt the least developed countries, the vast bulk of them. So we need to undertake special measures to assist them.
We have a question here which is coming from one of our viewers. It comes in from Bahia. He's writing to us from Amman in Jordan. And his question is, how has globalization contributed to the current food crisis, and how will we get out of this?
Well, we can draw indirect connections in the following sense. One of the important reasons, there's several reasons, but one of the important reasons is that India and China in the last 20 years have made major strides in their economic performance ever since they went into outward orientation, into removing the trade barriers, reducing them substantially, and so on. That's among the many other measures of reforms which they undertook. But certainly globalization in the sense of reduced trade barriers of their own has been extremely important. And that has led to massive reduction, very accelerated high growth rates have led to rapid reduction in poverty. 200 million people in India alone have been removed from extreme poverty above the poverty line. It's not that they're very much better off, but they are better off. So they're eating more. And that's what President Bush said the other day, which really upset Indians, but it was a purely factual statement. Now, this, of course, is one of the reasons why demand has grown up. In 1972, all the harvests in India, China, Russia, etc., failed simultaneously, and food prices rose. People were holding food, food back. Export controls were being used, and that was a case where it was a pure supply side effect. Now we have demand side effects also, because rice harvesters failed in Australia, but it's not that big a deal like the 72 situation. But the demand has increased, and that's due to India and China actually having become very successful, and that means that could not have happened in the same degree without their opening up to trade. So in that sense, you could blame globalization. But that's not what people mean, particularly on the populist side and on the left, that globalization is causing a lot of harm. Globalization is leading to prosperity, which leads to increased demand, and therefore we have to actually respond to that. My worry, of course, is that in the old days we had the Green Revolution, which was really expanding production. So now I think we have to rethink the issue of the so-called Frankenstein foods, the genetically modified foods, because so far, I have nothing going for them. I don't hold stock in Monsanto, which is producing these among other firms. In fact, I never consult for corporations. But we have to really rethink the issue and say, look, maybe there's a remote chance, which has not been established yet, that these might turn out to be environmentally problematic or might do crazy things to the human race and so on. But so far, there's no scientific evidence at all for that. On the other hand, we have the real fact of starvation possibility. So we have to put Frankenstein versus a Grim Reaper. And I would say, look, my choice would be to go ahead with the GM products. Similarly, I think on biofuels, that's another supply side factor. A lot of corn has been diverted on environmental grounds, and what we thought was at that time was reasonable, has been diverted from food supply to the ethanol production. Now we'll have to rethink whether we.
Yeah, I just want to look very quickly. We don't have too much time left, but I want to look quickly at the labor situation as well. When we look at wage levels and labor standards in developing countries,
right?
Hasn't the Western countries benefited from that? Running sweatshops in Asia, for instance.
Yeah, sweatshops are different from low wages. Low wages are endemic. That's part of the per capita incomes being low. Wages are low when incomes are low. So poor countries have lower wages. Now whereas sweatshops means you're putting a kid to work for long hours, including in hazardous conditions. Now, that's a no-no in my book. I mean, you don't have to, I mean, you know, even poor countries should not be doing things like that.
Professor Bhagwati, I'm going to ask you about things like cultural globalization. We've been talking about economic globalization, but cultural globalization, is that largely a one-way street from developed countries to developing countries?
Well, it has tended to be from the United States in particular, I would say, because the United States is the one country that's not worried about cultural globalization, as you know. It's the only country that doesn't have a cultural, culture minister, like Canada has and lots of other countries have, because United States is the top of the heap. First, it's a country of immigrants. So, you know, a lot of cultures come in continuously. Indian music, Chinese acupuncture, whatever you want is available, not just 200 varieties of cheese and so on. So it is absorbing continuously the foreign culture and is not threatened by it. At the same time, it processes it through the sausage machine, and then whatever it comes up with in the end, you know, like rock music, etc., tends to go elsewhere. So it exports its own culture. So that is what you have. But I think basically what people worry about, as far as I can see, is not Coca-Cola or Kentucky Fried Chicken and Starbucks. I mean, you know, people don't even know in some cases whether it's really these things have come from United States. There was a survey in China, and you know, people are asked, you know, what do you think of McDonald's? What nationality it is? And over 50% thought it was Chinese, because these institutions, you know, these corporations or outlets accommodate to local culture. But I think where people really feel threatened, I think, is in feudal cultures, because America also exports, you know, I mean, with the modern, you know, lapse under the Bush administration being a temporary aberration, I'm sure. But basically, it's at the frontier on children's rights, women's rights, lesbian rights, all sorts of human rights, and so on. And it's sort of pushing the frontier continuously, because the system is full of ferment for new ideas, and you know, it's really an individualistic culture which believes in the egalitarian notion. Every human being has a dignity of their own, which is very unusual for most feudal cultures. And I think when these ideas begin to spread, the more traditional cultures feel threatened. And I think that's where the anti-Americanism and the sense that our culture is being lost comes from, not from having Coca-Colas and Kentucky Fried.
Professor, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks for joining us. That was Jagdish Bhagwati talking to us from New York. And thank you for being with us. On the next show, we speak with the Eritrean president as his country marks Independence Day. See you next time.